getting your coffee and your goodies, there's a paper up here written by our own member, Manus Edwards. And this paper was published, I believe, in Christian News. And it's worth the read. He's made copies. This is my one. Rich is going to go around and hand them out. And just let him know, and Rich will give you one of those. So that's what that is. You can keep visiting. I'm going to get some coffee before we start. Go ahead and get started. We are working our way through Daniel chapter 3. And while we're doing so, Rich has two things. He has three things. He has a paper by all stand and sing, okay? We're going to come on. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him, all creatures here below. Praise Him above, ye heavenly hosts. Praise, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen. Thank you, everybody, for doing that. And thank you, Sarah, for indulging today. And I noticed the blue sign spot is on the fellowship wall. So, if anyone can help out with serving. The youth group's still working on that, so more to come on that as a rating opportunity. But thanks for doing this today, sir. I didn't know he was actually going to sing. That's pretty good. All right. We were working our way through Daniel chapter 3. And we've been talking about what's going on historically. Remember that King Nebuchadnezzar, he came to power in the year 605 BC. And it's about that time then that he also he invades and conquers the area that is the kingdom of Judah. Judah capitulates. They send some of their young people back to Babylon. And we're going to hear a little bit more about that. He invades again in the year 597. And it's after that he comes back to Babylon, and there is a rebellion amongst his troops. And this is actually a fairly common thing historically. Even in the Roman Empire, parts of the Civil War have to do with rebellions at home amongst the veteran troops. So, for example, Caesar Augustus had this problem because they all wanted a farm after they got out of the military. And so he had to kick people off their land and give the soldiers a farm, or the soldiers were going to rebel and assassinate him. Nebuchadnezzar has a similar issue, and he puts it down with force. And it's after that then he's doing I call it a ancient social credit score check. Okay, and I use those words because have you heard what they're doing in China now? They're giving every citizen of China a social credit score to see who are the ones they need to keep their eye on and who are the ones that they can trust. Are you seeing that in the news? Okay, that's another
Yeah, I've seen that. If you get low on if you get a low score, is it true they'll lock up your finances and maybe even deny you your job?
That's what I hear. Leonard said, if you get low on the scores, is it true that they lock you up, both your finances and perhaps even you? That's the rumor. I don't know. I haven't been to China, but I've seen this on the news where that's what's going on. They have the scoring system for all the citizens, so they know who's a good citizen and who's not. And Nebuchadnezzar is doing a similar thing here. But his involves building a giant statue, plated in gold, an image, and calling together the entire local government where he just had this rebellion, and forcing them to worship. And anyone who does not worship, he knows is a potential problem. He knows then that those are the people to watch. And in fact, it's not just that for him, he has a punishment prepared for them. And we've kind of read about that a little bit as well. A fiery furnace. All right, and we're going to get there. So that's where we kind of left off, talking about Nebuchadnezzar. Now, we read the whole entirety of chapter 3 a couple weeks ago, and remember how we talked about how there's all these things listed over and over, and Daniel does that on purpose. Daniel lists the titles of all the people there. He lists the instruments of all the instruments being played. And it's these long lists. And the idea, from a literary standpoint, is that by doing this, Daniel is indicating the immense pressure that was felt, that all these things are there, that you need to do this because everybody else is doing, and this loud noise is pressuring you, and everybody who's anybody is participating. And that's this liturgy of this false worship. Okay? And I say liturgy for a reason. I know we're a liturgical church, and we have a liturgy that we follow and worship, but there's all sorts of liturgies in society, right? Okay, my kids are probably still at choir, but I can tell you the liturgy of the University of North Dakota fighting Sioux hockey. Sioux forever, okay? The pre-game liturgy involves Phil Collins, I Can Feel It Coming in the Air Tonight playing. And then you know that song where the drums kick in? Right? That's then when all the players come out on the ice. And when they score a goal, they play, can't remember the name of the band, they play a song and everybody goes, right? Okay? It's the liturgy of a hockey game. And it's worth going to see. Take it with you. There's other liturgies. We have one for Nebraska football, right? When the Nebraska... Okay, so we're not very good at it, but... No, just joking. Yeah, when that happens, everybody knows how to respond and what to do. Or when they score a touchdown and make the extra point, right? I don't know, right? You have a liturgy that you follow. And I would say there's even a liturgy in society, right? The things that we say and do interacting with the people in our neighborhood, right? There's certain things that you do and say, and a certain way that you're supposed to talk that makes everybody feel comfortable with each other, right? So you say, "What's up?" And they say, "Not much, how about you?" Right? Or, "How are you today, Pastor Poppy?" And he says, "I'm fine." Now, is that the truth? Is he really fine? I don't know. Right? But it's the liturgy that we follow, interacting with one another, and you just say these things and do these things without even thinking about it or knowing it. And now we're going to see kind of the way that idea is being brought home. You have all these people, the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers. And they get together in front of this statue. And they're all standing in front of this statue. And the liturgy goes like this. When the music plays, from the horn, the flute, the lyre, the harp, the trigon, the drum, and all sorts of music, when it plays, everybody falls down and worships. Everybody. Have you ever been someplace where everybody's doing something that you're not really sure about? What do you usually end up doing, even if you're not sure about it? Whatever the thing is. Because of the social pressure. That's what Nebuchadnezzar is after. He's got all this social pressure pushing down this idea. So I'm going to read 8 through 18 here, and you're going to see this social pressure as they go about the liturgy of secular worship. I'm going to call it secular worship just because it's not the real God here. Okay? So Daniel chapter 3, starting at verse 8. Therefore at that time certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, I'm too far. We're going to start back here at verse 4. The herald proclaimed aloud, you are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, you're to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. Therefore, as soon as all the people heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews who you have appointed over the affairs of the provinces of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. We're going to pause there. I want to point out something interesting too. Every time we read this at Easter Vigil service, I wonder to myself, what in the world is a trigon? Okay, what's this bagpipe that they're talking about? It's interesting. Okay, first off, this is what an ancient lyre looked like. And I know that TV, you can't get it stuck to my computer. It's a turtle shell. And then coming out of the turtle shell is the skull of some kind of wild antelope with the curly horns. And they're using those horns to hold up a wood beam, and then you have strings stretched between them. And then you also have leather around the turtle shell. It kind of looks like a banjo sort of thing in a way. That's what a lyre was. Something just like that. That's the way they made them in the ancient world. You can't buy them like that any longer, but that's the way they used to make them. A trigon would be a similar thing, except it's wood, and it's in the shape of a triangle. And it's the place you place the strings that gives you the different pitches then. Of these 6 instruments that are mentioned here, the first 3 of them are typically Semitic in both what they are and then also the word that's used to describe them. And when I mean Semitic, I mean this is stuff that Hebrews would know and are playing. So the horn, the Hebrews had horns, right? Shofars, you take the horn off of its case and you cut a hole in one end and blow in it, and it's like a trumpet. Like the Ewoks used in, what's the one? The Return of the Jedi? Right? Alright. I don't think Ewoks were necessarily Jewish in their ancestry, but it's possible. Horns, flutes, and harps. And when they say harp, we mean a lyre, sort of thing like that. The second 3 instruments are all transliterations of Greek words. They're not Semitic. They're not declined in the Hebrew. They're just a transliteration of Greek instruments, which I think is really key, because who's one of the people that the Babylonians and the Persians after them are constantly fighting with? The Greeks. Their culture is drifting and sneaking in already, even before they conquer the area. So the lyre, the trigon, and the bagpipe is what we translated in our ESV. To the best of my research, it's not a bagpipe. It's a drum of some kind where an animal skin is pulled tight over some sort of a pipe and you beat on it. The Hebrew is actually a transliteration of the Greek word timpani. And we know what a timpani is. It doesn't mean this was a timpani, but it's the same word transliterated into Hebrew. Okay, so now next time you review that, you know the instruments. And you can imagine then the noise, the pressure. You have all these instruments, horns, flutes, harps, drums, playing, and when that happens, you're supposed to fall down and worship. All right, there's my random, interesting historical tidbit for the day. Yeah.
Okay, again, how come Daniel wasn't included in that?
We're going to get there. I don't know. That's on the next slide. The question was, where's Daniel at? We'll get there the next slide. Any other questions about the fun instruments? All right. Pastor Poppy's thinking about starting a band with horns and trigons. So he just left so we can say that. If you're interested, give him a call. All right, where's Daniel? That was the question that was asked. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are there. They are commanded to worship, and what do? They refuse. They stand up against all the pressure of the liturgy of the world. They refuse to participate. And the question I think has been asked about every week since we got to chapter 3, where's Daniel? Why isn't he involved in that? And it's actually an interesting thing. The text gives us a clue about that. If you remember, when Daniel interpreted the dream at the end of chapter 2, Daniel was promoted to be a member of the king's court. And so he participates in the king's court. And I know that's maybe not completely clear how those things work in our mindset. We don't have kings. But you can think of it kind of like the president has a cabinet. And those are the people who he surrounds himself with, hopefully so that he's making wise, well-informed decisions, because he's not just one man. He's getting input from all these other people who are experts in their field. That's what the king's court would be like as well. And Daniel serves on the king's court. And this is more clear in the Hebrew than in the English. Those are not the people that Nebuchadnezzar calls up to this worship service. Instead, the Hebrew indicates that it's the officials of the province of Babylon. And so, a way to think about this is Daniel is serving on the president's cabinet, and there was a rebellion in Nebraska. No, let's do Iowa. Okay. There's a rebellion in Iowa against the United States. And the president put it down, and so then he goes to Iowa, and he gets all the Iowa officials together, and he says, this is what you're going to do. Would those Iowa officials involve the president's cabinet necessarily? No. And that's what's happening here. It's the officials in the province of Babylon. It is the capital province, but it's not necessarily the king's court. That answer the question? I know a couple people have asked that. That's what the Hebrew is indicating here. Okay? The officials of the province are there to worship, not necessarily the officials of the royal court. Now, the reason this is important to know and catch that difference is because some people say Daniel is a later invention. It's not really written by Daniel. And the reason you know that is because Daniel wasn't thrown into the fiery furnace. But I would submit to you it's actually the opposite. If you were inventing the book of Daniel later on, who would you make sure you threw in the fiery furnace? Daniel. Because if you didn't, people would come along later and say, what happened to Daniel? Like Gary, okay? It is one of those things that the absence of the person who's the main character of the story indicates it's an actual historical event. Because if it's invented, you add the main character in. We have similar things in the Gospels. There's a guy who wrote a great book on this called Jesus and the Eyewitnesses. He talks about things like at the resurrection in the Gospel of Luke, there are two men on the road to Emmaus. And Luke tells you the name of one of them, but not the other one. And that's really weird. If it's an invention, you would expect to either have the name of neither of them or both of them. But Luke only gives you one. And what's the reason Luke only gives you one? Because that's an eyewitness at the time he wrote it, who you could still go and ask. We talked about this in the book of Acts on Thursday as well, with some of the places where it names one person or two people, but not the entire group. And the reason is these are people you can ask who are still witnesses who are alive at that time. And that indicates the source of the historical narration. Does that make sense? So this is indicative of it actually being a historical account. All right. So, let's keep plugging away then. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego don't worship. They refuse to participate in the liturgy of the secular world. They refuse to go and participate in this false worship. And as a result, they are accused before the king. Remember, why is the king doing this? To figure out who's loyal, who's on my side. And now the Chaldeans go to the king and say, we know 3 people who are against you. And Nebuchadnezzar is nervous about this. Why? He just had a rebellion in the province of Babylon. Remember, we saw the Babylonian Chronicles indicate this. Okay? It's ironic because the Chaldeans are the ones who accuse Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And the reason it's ironic is because at the end of chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar is going to kill all of the wise people, and Daniel says, don't kill them, don't kill the Chaldeans, the satraps, and all these people. Daniel intercedes for these unfaithful people, and now when they have the opportunity to return the favor, what do? Throw them under the bus. These 3 guys won't worship the way you command. They won't do what you want to do. And the accusation is threefold. The things that they say to King Nebuchadnezzar. They don't pay attention to you. They don't serve your gods. They don't worship your statue. Those 3 things are the accusations brought against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Okay, yeah, Tim.
Do you think there was any connection between the fact that this was not that long after the king had a dream about a different statue made out of different things? But
I would only be able to speculate.
that's fair.
And I don't want to do that in Bible class. It's possible. It's about 8 years after the last chapter. So there's a little bit of time that's passed. But I would imagine that the dream is always there. Nebuchadnezzar remembers it. So, knowing those 2 things, I can only speculate. Okay. So the accusation. They don't like you, they don't serve your gods, they don't worship your statue. Nebuchadnezzar reacts to this, okay? Let's read that, because I stopped before we got there. Chapter 3, verse 13 and following. Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods, or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, feel the pressure there, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will save you out of my hands? Okay? He says, is it true that you do not serve my gods? Is it true that you don't worship the golden image? You see here that social credit score check. There were 3 accusations, remember? They don't pay attention to you, they don't serve your gods, they don't worship the statue. Nebuchadnezzar only asks them about 2, the worshiping the gods and the worshiping the statue. And their answer to those 2 will indicate the answer to the first one. If you won't worship my gods and you won't worship my statue, then it's obvious you're not going to be loyal to me. And if you don't do it, I'm throwing you in the fiery furnace. Now, we talked about how in society there is a unspoken liturgy. When you don't participate in it, what's the response?
Anger.
Okay. What's that?
Anger.
Anger?
Cancel.
Cancel culture? Right? Attack? Disbelief from the people. So last week at the very end, we hardly had time to talk about it, we were asked a question about homosexual marriage. When you go out into the world and someone starts to talk about homosexual marriage, and you stand up, if you overcome the pressure and say, I don't think that's right because God's word says it's sin, what's the response?
I'm not tolerant.
They're not, yeah, they say that about you, you're not tolerant. Who's the actor from Guardians of the Galaxy and
Chris Pratt.
Chris Pratt, thank you. Chris Pratt is a member of a Christian church that didn't believe in homosexual marriage. And what did they try to do to him? Erase him. Cause him to lose his job. Try and get him in the news less. Put pressure on him to change his view publicly. Have you seen these sorts of things with other celebrities? Now even Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are standing before the king. And the king himself is saying, you need to change your view. And if you do, well and fine. And if you don't, I'll kill you. In the early Christian church, under the early Roman emperors, these sorts of things happened. Okay? Just lost the name of the province. It was on the tip of my tongue and it's gone. There was a persecution of Christians where they gathered them all up. It was winter. There was a lake. And so they stripped all the Christians naked, tied them up, and left them in the middle of this frozen lake. And the Roman soldiers stood off from a distance, watching them. And anyone who denied Christ, they would untie and warm up and set free. And the rest they would leave there to die. That's the same kind of pressure. Do we face that pressure now? Yes. Not to the extremes yet. Is it potentially possible that we will face it to that extreme? I think it is. I hope it doesn't happen, but it's possible. The Christian church right now is not, it's opposed to the liturgy of the world. And the pressure is building. And I think we have to be aware of that. And just keep it in your mind. It might be homosexual marriage. It might be other things. I heard you just a second. I forgot. It was just in the news 2 days ago, Pastor Bobby, 3 days ago. You remember our brothers and sisters in the ELCA a couple years ago passed a resolution that allows a congregation to have homosexual marriages take place in it and to have homosexual clergy, but it didn't force. And each congregation was free to make its own decision on this matter. And just a couple days ago, in the news, the ELCA said they're reevaluating that. And they are potentially kicking churches out that don't follow that practice. And that's tricky because in the ELCA, the congregation doesn't actually own the building. The church does. And if you want to learn more about that, are the Penningtons here? No, they must have left. Talk to the Penningtons. Their son-in-law is a pastor in New York at a church trying to leave the ELCA and join the LCMS. New York City. What's the value of a property in New York City? A lot. The church body, the ELCA, does not want them to have the building because that's potentially millions of dollars that they can gain from selling it. Okay? If that's happening in the ELCA, well, not too long ago we were sort of close to. Is that fair to say, Pastor Poppy, in the 60s and 70s? Kind of fell apart then, that's good. If that's happening there, are similar things possible to happen here in our own church body? Yeah. These things are there.
We were actually in fellowship with one of the three predecessor bodies.
Yeah. We were in fellowship before all the seminary things happened. That was good. All right. You asked a question and I was talking. Okay. You see lots of this pressure on television. I'd say that's part of this secular liturgy, right? Have you seen the latest episode of? I don't watch much TV, so I don't know. I watch reruns of MASH. Even that's a little risque for me. Okay. On Ghosts, they just introduced two of the characters as homosexual ghosts. Okay? What's the show Ghosts?
It's a big people buy a mansion and it's haunted by ghosts.
Okay.
Died and didn't get further this below.
Okay. I'm going to do one that I do know a little bit about. NFL. Does NFL, in their the things they depict on their broadcasts, push a particular agenda? That's that liturgy, the pressure. The same sort of thing Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are facing. Commercials. You notice in commercials they've begun to be much more ambiguous with their families and with the people in there. And I'm not talking color of skin, that doesn't matter. Talking about girls being married and boys being married, and even boys dressed as girls and things. I know that we keep picking on that Sixth Commandment issue. It's not just the Sixth Commandment. Think about the way the world has been since Roe versus Wade was overturned. Is there pressure there? Okay? It's there. All right,
just along with the persecution comes an opportunity. And that is an opportunity to make a good confession. And I have several friends in the ELCA that are hardcore confessionals. And because of family circumstances, or people are in love with a building, or you know how that goes, tradition, they're never going to leave. This thing that's happening might force them to leave, where a situation they could never leave otherwise. But it's going to backfire on the LCA.
Yeah.
And conservative confessional pastors, conservative confessional laymen, conservative confessional congregations are going to end up leaving. And where they go, we don't know. But they're going to make the good confession as a backlash against this thing that's being forced on them. We can learn from that too.
Yeah, and I think that's it. We're going to learn from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as well. As Poppy said, this pressure gives us the opportunity to confess the truth. And that's where we'll actually head. We won't get there today. I want to end with this question then from Nebuchadnezzar. If you don't do it, who is the God who will deliver you out of my hand? That's the question Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are asked by King Nebuchadnezzar. And there's an implication there. If you don't worship my powerful God and my, I'm going to call it divine or secular liturgy again, how could your weak God possibly save you? Nebuchadnezzar means that because he has just besieged Jerusalem, which capitulated and gave in to him. How could the God who let me conquer your land possibly save you here in my land? And in a way, that's what the world says to us also, right? Okay? You talk to people who march to the beat of the world's liturgy, and you disagree with them, that's kind of their response too, isn't it? How could your God possibly say that? You're wrong. God is loving. Have you heard that? Okay, is it true? Yes. But it's true in the sense, loving means setting boundaries. And they are throwing that idea out. I love my kids, so I don't let them play in the street. Okay? Because it's not good for them. God loves us, and so he says, these are things you should avoid. When people say in our world today, God is love, they're talking about a different God who has no boundaries, and they mean love lets you do whatever you want to do. And that's not the true God. Okay? That's not the true God. So what God will save you from my hand? We know the answer, and this is where we'll start next week then. Who's the God who can save us? Who's the God who can save Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, who conquered the world through Jesus Christ. And that's the same promise for us. If we're, like I said, it could happen, I hope it doesn't. If we're captured, stripped naked, and tied to Holmes Lake in the middle of the winter, the way this winter's going, it might be nice. If that happens to us, who can save us? Even if we die, God will. And that's pretty awesome. And that's the thing we're going to cling to. And I want to end with that idea. We'll get into it in more detail next week, looking at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's answer. But I don't want you to be left without that promise. God can save us and will save us. He promised to. And if you don't believe it, look at Jesus, who rose from the dead. All right. The church is going to start, so the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you